Man United are talking to Jorge Mendes about Balde from Barcelona, and my immediate thoughts on this are don't do it, and I'll give you the reason why I wouldn't want to do it at the moment. Look, he's 22 years old, he's rapid, he's excellent, he's aggressive going forward. On paper, he's the exact sort of 22-year-old left back that United need. He had £1 billion Euro clause in his contract, but there's one massive glaring problem with Balde is his injury record, and we'll go through it because it is horrific. It reads like an obituary. Now, when you look at it, or how many days he's actually missed, it is so bad. At 22 years old, I fear that this is another injury prone player waiting to happen, and I'll tell you why. United will still look to do the deal, and of course it's all to do with the wages as well. Look, how many times have we been here before? Baleba is injured already and we haven't signed him, but we will get on to that as well. Look, he's going to be out for 3 weeks, but again, he's injured. He's not going to play. Look, do we want a conversation about these players that are cheap but they're injury prone? I don't want any player that Barcelona wants to sell. You know, Balde is typical of the sort of signing that we will do. And look, later on, we're going to talk about, look, his age, his wage, injuries, and that is what we're going to do. But look, do we take this opportunity? You know, is he going to have time to heal? He's 22 years old, and maybe we could get a diamond in the rough. We're going to talk about Ivan Toney, Mateta, the chances of signing those. Zirkzee, Napoli have made an inquiry. Look, there is still injuries in this squad as well, and there's plenty of things to talk about. I want to talk about Michael Carrick and what he said in the post-match conference, and he got a little bit annoyed. And I think some of the things he says, they do concern me. They absolutely do concern me. So please get in there with your views and opinions. I will get into the chat. Please let me know what you think in the chat, and guys, do not forget to give the video a like and subscribe. It does really help the channel out. So look, let's get into it. Balde, why am I saying don't do it? Why am I going against maybe what some of you think on this player? So Balde, look, let's get into it. Look, he's 22 years old. He's 5'10", left back. And look, good player. Look, Barcelona rated him so highly, they put £1 billion clause in his contract. He's not worth that, but that is what they do to protect the value. Now, look, we have made contact with Mendes. Excuse me. Jorge Mendes is going to be involved in this deal. Of course he is. Of course he is. We are talking to Balde. We're trying to figure out if we can do a deal on what the price will be on the player. The price is touted around £41 million, 41 to £50 million. And I'll tell you for why we will do that deal. Look, anytime that Mendes is involved, the super agent, there are agents fees involved. There are very high agents fees. Look, if this was another transfer, and again, I will get into why we will do it as well, rather than a Lewis Hall, because it does represent for Ineos good value, but value is not always what it seems to be. So look, we're going to go through why I'm going to say don't touch the player injury wise. So look, Balde, we might as well get straight into it. Look, he has missed, bearing in mind he's 22 years old, he has missed over 560 days in his short career. He's missed 560 days. Now I want you to let that sink in. You know, he's been going for 4 seasons. I think this is his 5th season. He misses 100 days on average per season. Now, we all talk about a Mason Mount, Toney. When we speak about these players, that they have missed 75 days a season. I think Mason Mount has missed more games, more days than that. But look, those are the official stats. Toney, injury prone. Mason Mount and Balde at the moment has missed more games than those 2 players. Now, we're going to go through his injuries one by one. And look, the reading is not great. So look, last season was okay, but he still missed 60 days. Muscle injury, hamstring injury. Then the previous season, look, he missed 30 games, which wasn't too bad. Hamstring injury again. Now the big injury that he had, he ruptured his tendon. Now when that happens, look, hamstring issues. Look, he's a very, very quick player. Now he's 22 years old at that age already. Look, Luke Shaw, I'll give you an example. Luke Shaw's wasn't his fault. Luke Shaw came back. You can argue the injury. I'll give you the both sides of this. So Luke Shaw was injured. I mean, double leg break, horrific injury. Luke Shaw came back to be one of, I would say, the Premier League's, Europe's, one of the best players. Look, he went into left centre back and he was fantastic for a couple of seasons. There was no argument from me. And then as he's got older, obviously through no fault of his own, he's slowed down and he's not the player that he was. And look, that is perfectly acceptable. When you've had that injury, he's had a fantastic career. He's been a fantastic player. But look, that is what happens. Now, Balde already has missed a year and a half already at 22. He's had some horrific injuries. Look, hamstring and the ruptured of his tendon, look, that kept him out for 182 days. Now look, that is a significant injury. Look, he has had an ankle ligament tear, he's had an abductor pain, ankle injury, lumbago. Now lumbago, for those of you who don't know what that is back pain. So that is an issue in your back, shoulder injury, ankle strain. So look, he's a very, very quick player. Look, when he come through, look, I'm at 20. He came through early. Now he didn't play loads of games at the early stage, and look, when you're that age, you do still grow into your body. So look, like Kobe Mainoo had injuries as well. Look, now that he's 22 years old, look, he should be grown out of that. His muscles will now mature. But my biggest concern with any potential deal for this player is you have to look at the injury record. Now, if this progresses and if we were to look to sign the player, we would the medical would have to be thorough. Look, it would have to be absolutely thorough. They would need to go through all of the tests. Now, the fact that Barcelona are willing to sell the player, look, I think it tells you everything that you need to know. One of the reasons why it concerns me is because Barcelona like to pull the levers. Barcelona do need to get rid of players. Now, look, one of the things that impacts teams is UEFA squad cap. Now, one of the biggest things for UEFA squad cap is basically the wages. Now, Balde to Barcelona would represent profit pure because he's coming through the Mestalla. So I understand why they would want to sell the player for that amount of money. So look, that makes complete sense. Now, what doesn't make sense to me is, look, he is cheap. His wages are 25k a week. And that is probably the mic drop in terms of this deal. Why they would look to not pursue Lewis Hall at this point is because he's on 25k a week. Now, if he came to the club, maybe he gets pushed up to 80k a week, maybe 100, and that's perfectly acceptable. So look, we would be talking, and again, I would be very, very difficult with a Barcelona. Let's just say you do it over 5 years. Look, that is less than 10 per year, and and maybe Barcelona are going to want to do a structured deal. You know, I think that we should try to take him to the cleaners if we were to do this deal. So excuse me. So for me, we would do it. Look, it would be around £8 million a year if we did salary as well. Look, that it is a salary of, let's just say it's 80,000 a week. Look, 160, 240, 320. That's less than £4 million a year. So between the two, it's going to cost you £12 million a year. And look, that is a massive consideration in this deal. That when we talk about the transfers, look, I don't prescribe to fees and the wages. I always say it is the success, but when it comes to UEFA squad cap, it is important, and we do have to talk about the deal. Look, the agents fees in this are going to be high as well. So look, I want you to get into the chat. Look, if you've listened to this, please give the video a like. It really does help us out. Look, the injuries a concern? Is there another left back that you would look to go to? Look, maybe we have moved away from Salinas because we know that Barcelona are in. Do we take a Balde off their hands? And then do they go and get Salinas? Salinas, they could go and do that deal. Do they, David Rahm, why is that not happening now? And I think this is to do with the wages. So look, please get in there with your chat. Please get in there. Please let me know what you think about this, and I will get into the chats as well. So look, the Balde deal. Look, it is a gamble. It is a risk. But the biggest thing here, look, he is potentially, and when we talk about potential, look, Barcelona saw him as a massive, massive potential. Now, look, if he's grown into his body, and I know it sounds a bit weird, but if he's grown into his body, you look at Dembele. If you look at a Dembele, look, Dembele had massive issues, and Dembele, look, they structured Dembele. Do you want a player that could potentially be our left back for the next 10 years? Or would you rather just go to Lewis Hall and just suck it up and go and do the deal? And we will talk about Lewis Hall because there are some interesting things about Lewis Hall that came up as well. Peter Schmeichel, his comments on him as well. So I'm going to get into the comments. Please let me know. Please give the video a like as well. It really does help us out. I promise you, more than anything else, it does help us out. So look, let's get into the chats. Danny is in the house. Exactly, hit the like button on the way in. It costs you nothing. It is completely free. The Truth says, let's go, JB. And we will talk a little bit about Carrick as well. We won't pay the fee for Balde, says Lee Wood. Now, Lee, as I've said there, look, the fee is not going to be a problem. It is the wages for us. And I think of all the deals that we are looking to do, look, if you think about a David Rahm is going to cost you 30 million, but his wages are going to be 100k, 122, 130k. Now, Balde is going to be younger. The whole deal for Balde is going to be cheaper because of the wages as well. So I think that, look, this is a deal that they could potentially do. Did Mount go somewhere, or is he injured? The Truth, look, he is injured, and we'll go through that at the back end of the show as well. He's around 45 million euros, and Ineos won't pay it. Look, I think that they might do it. I personally think that we should look at David Rahm, exactly that. He has a release clause of 20 million. There's some confusion with me. I could be wrong on it. I thought it was 30 million, but look, if it is 20, Lee, I would go all over it. If David Rahm is 20 million, you've got to go for the deal. Nikki is in the house. Big up, JB. Big up to you. I hope you're doing extremely well. I don't think that we should go for Balde. Bluey Games is in the house. Absolute legend. Are we getting a backup strike? So Kevin, I will get into that as well. Look, I think we should do. It all hinges on whether Zirkzee leaves the club. So we will talk about that as well. Lumen is in the house. Big up to Lumen. Colin Clark, Balde's agent, using us to get a better deal. He wants to stay at the new camp. And again, Colin, I think you're right on that. Look, I'm going to say this. Barcelona have told him that he can go. It is up to him if he goes. That is what they have told him. But he does want to stay at the new camp. I do agree. Now, one of the things I do also want to say, bearing in mind the injury record, now that this may come into your thinking, it may not come into your thinking. Look, if he's got all of these injuries already and he's playing in La Liga. Now, La Liga for me, again, look, you can say what you like. I'm not disrespecting the league, but imagine if Baldy comes into the Premier League. Look, the rigors of the Premier League. It is a fast, frantic league. Is Baldy's body going to hold up there as well? So, look, guys, please get in there with your chats. I want to know about what you think about everything we're going to talk about today. David Rahm would also work as a temporary Luke Shaw upgrade. Yes, I agree. We are currently not in a position to be buying only young talents. I don't mind it, but we don't need our extreme fan base scapegoating kids. Agree with you 100%. Look, I think Amas for me, I would keep him. I think Amas is the way to go. I think that look, Amas, I think should be given an opportunity. Look, I think it's perfect for him to build into the squad. I don't know. We don't know behind the scenes, and is it somebody that we would throw under the bus? I don't know about that. So look, get in there again. If you heard anything, tell me what you think about David Rahm. Tell me what you think about, and I will read out the comments. And again, please give the video a like. So look, the next thing to talk about is a backup striker. So I will get into Michael Carrick's comments as well because it scares me. Michael Carrick at the moment scares me. I know it's only one game, and I do agree with some of the things that he said in his post-match, but we will get on to that as well. So look, backup striker. We could do something out of left field, but this hinges on a Zirkzee. Does Zirkzee leave? Where does Zirkzee go? Now, look, there is rumour of Napoli. Look, Napoli need a striker. Lukaku was gone to Fenerbahce, I believe, and they are looking for another striker, number 10. And Zirkzee does fit the bill. Look, Roma like him. Zirkzee is really respected in the Italian league. Now, I think that, look, depending on a deal that we could possibly do, for me, look, Zirkzee, I really like Zirkzee. Zirkzee isn't playing. I think he's nailed on to leave. Look, I'm going to say this, unless the deal falls through, Zirkzee doesn't want to stay. I think Zirkzee wants to go back to Serie A, and I've not got a problem with that. Look, Zirkzee, the one thing I will always respect about him, what he did at this club, is this. Fans were calling him out from 3 months in. And what he decided to do was he decided to fight for his place at the club. Now, look, I absolutely respect that. Completely respect it. But look, I don't think he's built for the Premier League. I really, really know that he wants to go back to Italy. So look, I wish him well. Again, maybe if he goes back and he gets the game time, maybe he can become the player that he should be. Look, some players just suit different leagues. It doesn't mean to say that he's a bad player. I don't think he is. I just don't think he's the right player at the right time in the right league. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that as well. So look, there is no disrespect from me. I don't think he's been a flop. I think Zirkzee is unfortunately a victim of Ten Hag. I think he's a victim of coming in at the wrong time. Manager's changed. Maybe he's not good enough for the league. But look, I wish him well, and hopefully, look, he can make the move and we get him off of the books. Lumen says, JB, have you and Ineos agreed on one player so far? Look, I'll give you, before we get on to the striker situation, I do want to talk about the striker situation. I do want to talk about Michael Carrick's post-match. He got a bit annoyed, and I get it. I do get it. But I think at the same time, he's got to understand that, some of the things he says, I think, are absolutely ridiculous. So, do I agree on signing? So, look, Lumin, I like the Santos signing. I like the Tielemans signing. Now, my issues with the signings so far are these. Look, Santos is a risk. I understand why we've done that. Look, as is shown against Hull, he's going to take time. Now, what I want from the fans on the Santos deal, look, he's clearly got something. I like Santos a lot, but he needs time. The problem with Santos is that we're asking a young player to come in and already be an elite player, and fans will only see that. They'll see the price tag, and Santos needs time. Santos is gonna need 2 years. Look, the Champions League experience. If you saw the whole game, look, I thought he played well, but he's not a Casemiro, and people shouldn't be expecting a Casemiro yet. Casemiro, one of the best DMs over the last 10 to 15 years. An absolute elite player, played in one of the most elite teams in Real Madrid. And that's where he got his experience. Santos is going to get his experience here when we are still in transition. We're still a transition team. We're still not got that elite player. And I think Santos, again, I don't want Santos to suffer from a fan base that is frustrated. I think Santos will be a good player when he has somebody like a Delict back in the side. Lissandro, whether I want him to go or not, he's going to be better learning from those type of players, and he needs time. I think this team needs an elite centre back. I think this team does need an elite CDM. Belaber's going to come in, and again, we're asking Belaber to basically come in and be that elite player. Now, look, Santos, I like the Santos signing, I do. Tillemans, look, the jury's out for me. Look, I know Tillemans is a good player. And again, look, it was his first game. I'm not going to go in on him. Look, I think 35 million. Again, I'm comfortable with that. He could be a fantastic deal, but as we saw against Hull, there are going to be teething issues, and I do think people need to give him time. I don't agree with not signing a more elite CDM, but Tillemans, I understand. I get the signing. But again, is Tillemans going to be here to help Kobe Mainu? And I think that's one of the considerations as well. Scott is in the house as well. So look, I do like Santos. I do like Tillemans. But as we've seen, look, people are talking about these signings, how we've got this amazing deal done. And when you buy cheap, you buy twice. But look, Tillemans, for me, I'm hoping he's going to grow into the season. Again, he needs time. Santos is going to need time. So I do agree with those two. Belaber as well. Look, Belaber, I really like the signing. Look, we have been a fan on this channel for quite some time. I wanted him to come last season. I know other channels do have an agenda. They will say they don't have an agenda against this player, but they do have an agenda. Look, Belaber is a defensive monster. He is athletically fantastic. He's good, but he still has got time to grow, and he still has to grow into this team and has to grow into the Premier League. Look, I don't agree with the Belaber deal, and I'll tell you why I don't agree with the actual deal itself. Look, we're going to pay £70 million for this player. There is a sell-on clause. Brighton have got a sell-on clause in this deal. So, look, I don't like the structure of the deal. I like the player. Now, look, when we're looking at the midfield, you've got Kobe Mainu, you've got Belaber, you've got Tillemans, you've got Mason Mount. You can class that in there as well. Santos. On paper, our midfield looks really, really good. How is Michael Carrick going to accommodate all of those players? Kobe Mainu, come on. Look, whenever Michael Carrick switches this team around, these players have to make an impact. These players have to make an instant impact. We saw Kobe Mainu come on. To be fair to Kobe Mainu, but how many times are we going to say this throughout the season? Kobe Mainu or Tillemans or whoever comes on has to make an impact. We can't just have players who come on for the numbers. So what we're going to have to see in the midfield. If it's Baleba, Tillemans, Mainu, a Baleba, a Santos, whoever comes on has to make that impact. They have to watch the game. I like the rotation. We asked for numbers. Ineos put the numbers in there. So look, as much as I think that we needed an elite player, we asked for signings. We got the signings. So look, I think that we need to give them all time. Dennis, why would Carrick say there's positive things? There's nothing positive from the 2-0 loss. He should have just admitted he got it wrong and left the interview kind of embarrassed us. I do want to talk about that. I am going to talk about that next because Michael Carrick's comments. Look, I think Michael Carrick, I'll get into it. Yes, JB Scott is in the house. Natasha is in the house. We only struggle against the low blocks in the Champions League. We'll somehow make it to the semis and maybe make some upsets, but we'll get knocked out in the Carabao Cup by flipping Charlton. And do you know what? I don't disagree with that statement. Look, we are the sort of team that can go into the Champions League and get to a semi-final. If you look at an Atletico Madrid, if you look at a Sporting Lisbon, if those teams can get into a semi-final, I think that we are capable of it. The only thing I'm going to say is would you sacrifice a fourth place finish for a quarterfinals, semi-finals of the Champions League? And I've got to say no, because we've got to do that. But look, I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. I think that we could do that. I absolutely think that we could do it. And guys, please give the video a like. It really does help the channel out. Please like, subscribe, get into this community. Look, this community is the best on this platform. You guys are amazing. I can't thank you enough. So look, please get in there as well. I don't think Santos was bad. He did his job. He was average. Yeah, again, look, I think Santos wasn't bad. I don't think he had a bad game. What he suffered from is not being a Casemiro. Look, he found it difficult to shield the back four. And the reason he found it difficult is because he's inexperienced. Look, he did the best that he can do at the moment. I think if you've got more experienced defenders in there, they will tell him where to go and he will learn that position. So look, I'm not bothered with Santos. I think he's done great. I think he will grow into this team. I think he's almost there to be molded into whatever he can be as well. How many more signings do you think we'll do, Natasha? Look, I think we'll do one more, possibly two. Look, I think we need a striker. That is quite clear. Look, Cunha, Mbeumo. I'd put Mbeumo up top. Cunha is not a striker for me. We've got to play striker. I would go for a striker. I think that we will look to do it. Mateta. Look, I know some people don't like him. He's 29 years old. Mateta for me is perfect. I think he is a flat track bully. I think against Hull, I think Mateta would have had a field day. I think he's that sort of player. His arms, his elbows, he's 6'4". I think Mateta for me is perfect. Toney, I like Toney as well. I really do. But look, he's on 400k. I don't see how we do that deal unless there's some sort of loan deal. Saudi will have to pay some of the wages as well, 100%. So let's see what goes on with that as well. How many more? I've done that one. Singari could have been the better option for less money. Oh, don't even get me started. Singari has taken to the Premier League like a duck to water. Look, I put Singari into my dream team. Singari is going to be a fantastic player. Look, we spoke about Singari. Many of you intelligent, amazing people on this channel were talking about Singari. I like Singari. Look, we did it. We did the chats. And look, Singari for me, we should have done the deal. I really like the deal. I think he was £40 million. Young player. Look, Forest, or was it Brentford? Look, they've got an amazing player there. Look, they've got an absolute superstar on their hands. I think Singare is going to be brilliant. Look, as I say, he's taken to the Premier League like a duck to water, and I agree with you, but Belabor, I like the signing. I really like the signing. But I do agree with you. I think he would have been cheaper. Look, I'm not happy with a sell-on clause. We paid £70 million for a player, and the sell-on clause is in. How desperate do we have to be? I do like the signing, but again, it does feel like it's taken a tinge off of the signing as well. Bluey Game says, why are people turning on Tillemans after a game? The state of the fan base is horrendous. Liverpool fans gave Vert a whole season to adjust. And I agree with you. I agree with you. Look, as much as that is disgusting on this channel, I will never jump up and down, and I will never get out of my pram. Look, I've got to say this. Look, when we conceded goals, and when this is why I did my match reaction a day later, because I wanted to go away very calmly and think about the game and not react to it necessarily on the day. Look, I saw some reactions to the goals. I think it's pathetic. I think it's embarrassing. I've seen some channels, and I do think it is for clicks. It's very, very embarrassing. It's not because I'm not a passionate person, but look, we conceded goals, and there is no need to be jumping out of your seat unless it's a final, unless it's a Liverpool game. So look, that was embarrassing, and I agree with you. Look, Tillemans came off the back of a World Cup injured. £35 million. Now, I've seen some of those people who were saying that we bossed the Tillemans deal, 35 million. We've got to give Tillemans time. I saw some of the things that Tilleman did, some of the passing, some of the movement. Look, he needs to get fitter. He needs to grow into this team. Tillemans is a fantastic player. I've already said one of my concerns with Tillemans for this season is he was out for a number of games. But the fact, look, after one game, the performance, and we will talk a little bit about that, was awful. We can't hide away from that. But it is one game. If you look at Spurs, if you look at a Liverpool, Man City struggled. The only team that didn't, and I think they're going to win the league, is Arsenal. Look, it pains me to say it. I think Arsenal are going to win the league already. I think the one thing if we can take away already is I think this league is going to be ridiculously competitive, and I think that we could, if Michael Carrick gets this team right, if he can get the balance right. Look, I still think that there's an opportunity, but it's whether or not that he can do that. But to be calling Tillemans, look, fine, call Bruno Fernandes out. He is the captain. Maguire, Luke Shaw, these are seasoned professionals who are in this squad, and they've been in this squad. But look, we've got to give Tillemans time. Look, some of the passing that he did, he's a capable player. Yes, he's not particularly quick, but he is a good player. So look, we've got to give Tillemans time. We've got to be Santos time, and we can't beat some of these players up. Some of these players are low IQ. We know this. We know this. They don't ask for the deals, but look, there are some positives. Tillemans is a fantastic player. Santos is a work in progress. Balab is going to come in if we get a left back. And look, there is an opportunity here. So I do agree with you on that as well. Would you rather win the Champions League but finish seventh and get knocked out of every cup? Second or third, we have a few good cup runs. Look, the most important thing for me is this. We have got to be in the Champions League every single year. I would take that. If we win the Champions League, we get back into the Champions League. Okay. So for me, as long as we can get back into the Champions League, I would rather win the Champions League and get back into the Champions League. I don't know if that is the case. Somebody can correct me in the chat. If you win the Champions League, then I think you're automatically in it the next season. I think that is the case. I would do that because look, we've still got to make a league side. So as long as we get into the Champions League, look, if we can do both, fantastic. But we've got to be in the Champions League. So whether it is we sacrifice the Champions League and we get into the Champions League via the league, or we get into the Champions League via the league and we sacrifice the league, I've got no issue with that. But we've got to get into the Champions League. It is as simple. It is as simple as that. Failing that, Europa League, look, I know it's not great. I know the Europa League isn't perfect, but we've got to do it. So whatever we do, we've got to get into Europe next season. Samson, I like Baleba, but Singari could have been in early and hit the ground running. Exactly. Singari looked good, but it's one game. True, people are acting like he's prime Kante or something. Look, and again, look, Kante, Singari for me, I like him. Look, he's got a lot of time in this league. My only comment on him really is I think he's taken like a duck to water. I think he's a fantastic player. I think he's a good player. Look, nobody's prime Kante, are they? So, you know, done that one. Wilcox and Omar Barada were in the stand. They didn't look worried. Look, Goldbridge is a good guy, but he's a big reason why we considered a banter club. He always overreacts to basic goals. Rival use him to banter the whole fan base. Look, I'm not going to go too much on him. Look, he is beyond me. He is beyond this channel. There is no point in me having a comment. Look, I did see a reaction from him. Look, people. Look, I think people go over the top when it comes to him. Look, he has done extremely well for himself. There is no bitterness from me, 100%. There is just no need for that. Look, he is stratospheric. He is an entertainer. That is what he does. I do think it is a little bit embarrassing of somebody of that age to be doing that. But look, it is that is his channel. Nobody saying anything like he's prime Kante. I'm saying he was a cheaper profile. Goldfish is a clown who made money on our downfall. It's still one game. What about a striker? Look, I think we go Mateta, Toney. I think that is probably where we go. I think that is pretty much where we go. And guys, please give the video a like. It really does help the channel out. Let's get to 30 likes. Look, the moment this channel gets to 100 likes on a stream, I will give away a shirt. So look, it's up to you guys. If you want to win a shirt, get the video up to 100 likes. Done that one. Banter, you talking to me? Yes, and I've done that one. I love banter. Exactly. I was talking to Bluey Games. Even JB would do a go bridge for money. Jerry, look, Jerry, I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of me. Jerry, look, I'm not gonna look have a pop at you. I wouldn't, Jerry. I really wouldn't, buddy. Look, don't class everybody about the cash. Look, for me to make this channel bigger, it would be within my interest to start jumping up and down. You know, it would be in my interest to be clickbait. I'm simply not. Look, there are things. Look, I've got a job. I've got a very well paid job. Look, I'm not in this for the money. There are certain things I just don't do. Irrespective of whether it was to do with money or not. Um I'm not money centric. I've never been that way. So look, I understand the comment, and look, you know, I agree with you. A lot of people would do that, but I've got integrity. Look, there is something I just wouldn't do. There are some things that I just wouldn't do. So look, you can have your opinion. Again, that is what I am here for. It is for you to get to know me, and hopefully over the next however long I'm here, that you will get to see and understand. Look, I am passionate, but I'm very factual as well. And there's just no way that I would behave in that way. But look, it's each to their own. I'm not saying that he's that is bad. It's something that is just not my cup of tea. Um, Done that one. All right, no worries. How come you're not looking at? I don't know, Kevin. I don't know. Sam says, let's be honest, content creators ain't doing this for the love of their club. So they always push the narratives. Look, it's not something that I do. Um, I don't have an agenda on this channel. But look, Sam, I understand that. Look, when I talk about Carrick, when I talk about these players, I will always give you the both sides. And look, the way that I do things on this channel, look, this is why I don't get thousands of views, is because I don't jump up and down. I'm not going to push an agenda. Now, when I talk about a Balde, when I talk about it, look, I give you the both sides. I'll tell you that is injury prone. I'll tell you, everything negative, but also a Balde, look, potentially could be an absolute fantastic player. I will always give you the both sides, Sam. And there is no agenda on this channel. Goldfish wouldn't be big if United wasn't good. I'm sure our transfers more this year because of the Goldbridge types. I'm sure we hid our transfers more this year because of Goldbridge types. Look, hey there, Jude. It wouldn't surprise me. I'm going to counteract that and say I don't think we hid the transfers because I don't think our plan was good enough. I don't. Look, I don't think this club, and again, it's a very interesting opinion. Look, guys, your opinions today are very interesting. Look, I quite enjoy those views. Look, I don't think that Goldbridge has that much of a reach to impact the club. I just don't think he does. I think the reason why that this club has hidden the transfers is because they couldn't get targets A, B, and C. We are clearly on to C, D, and E. And look, there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what this club is trying to do, look, I'm comfortable with it. I may not always agree with it, but I'm comfortable with it. Look, they've got to own it. We've got to watch it. Dan, that one says, JB says how he sees it at United. Just look how AFTV wouldn't have gone big if Arsenal were good at the time. I like how the media doesn't know our business. And again, look, I don't disagree with you. You know, there are some things. Look, do I think we needed more? Yes, of course we do. We have done the financials on this channel. And again, my prediction looks like it could be right. Do I agree with it? No. Whether I like it or not, there are financial issues. But look, we have signed some good players. So look, not everything is completely bad. It doesn't have to be fake or forced, although his model has worked exactly that. JB isn't Goldbridge of the Goldbridge critical of the club same way as you. Look, I'm critical of this club, Jay. I've got to be. Look, I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to tell you that this club is amazing. I'm not going to tell you that this. Look, we can't be blind to it. Look, we've had the Glazers. I've done the financials on this channel. I'm an accountant by trade. I know our numbers. I did the Q3. If you look at our numbers, they are abysmal. I'm critical of the club because we've got to be. There is lots to criticise in this club. Look, there are some positives as well. Look, the transfer business with hindsight last year was good. Maybe the transfer business this year is going to be good as well. But look, we can't pretend that this club is perfect. And I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to tell you, like, Sir Jim is a fraud. Ineos are not good enough. Wilcox isn't. Omar Barada isn't. This club is not interested in certain things. So I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to be toxic positivity. So look, I would give you my view, and the one thing I will always do for you on this channel, I don't hide away from the comments. If you guys don't agree with me, I will give you your time and space on this channel. You will never get banned on this channel for having a different viewpoint to me. That is not how this works. Every year, we knew our business, then we overpay. Look, I don't prescribe to that, but again, I've explained it before. Overpaid for me is a really simplistic view. Net spend is wrong, is the wrong figure because it is just completely wrong. Overspending only becomes an overspend when you don't have success. Was Elliot Anderson, and he might never be worth what he went for. Sometimes you got to move from targets when it doesn't make sense. And I look again, I agree with you. Look, if we don't have the money to do these signings, then you're forced, and we are forced to do different business. Media didn't know because we weren't doing anything. I do agree with you. I'm so happy we didn't get Anderson. Goldbridge, yeah. Again, I look, Hassi, I'm not going to talk too much about it. Look, as I say before, GoBridge has no place on this channel. We're in two different places. He is, OG. He is, different stratosphere. There is no point. Look, if you were comparing the two channels, I'm basically a Vauxhall Nova. He is a Lamborghini. There is no point. There is no point in this channel giving time to it, because it's just crazy. This channel is not going to be that, and this channel will never be that, and I'm accepting of that as well. There is not a lot. There is not a lot that I can do about that. Anderson is the English Kovacic. Let's not pretend like the Glazers ain't holding back. Again, the Glazers are. Anderson is a good player, but not worth what he went for. The fee will also cause problems. Decent, but way overpriced. Big up the chat. Stephanie is in the house. I hope you're doing extremely well. Stephanie as well. No, I think we have the money, but we're not strong enough as a team. Look, Sam, we don't have the money. Look, again, I'm going to tell you guys, if you've watched the show before, look, just because I'm an accountant, or I was an accountant, doesn't mean I necessarily know more than you guys. I know you guys on this channel. Look, you on this channel are intelligent people. So just because I do a job doesn't mean that I'm more intelligent. Look, we don't have the money. From a factual perspective, Sam, we don't have the money. Doesn't mean to say if we finish in the Champions League, but look, people, the financial shows are there, but we simply don't have the money. Let me see what you're saying. But look, I'll come on to that as well. Done that one. 40 likes, and again, look, guys, please give the video a like. You missed my question. Okay. A Balde. No, I don't want Balde. And again, I'll give you the two sides really simply before I go into the Michael Carrick and the comments that he made. Look, I don't mind people having a different opinion to me. Balde, on the face of it, is a modern. He's quick. He's modern. I like the player type. He's missed 560 days. He's 22 years old. He's had 10 injuries, including a rupture of his tendon, hamstring injuries. Now, look, people can be okay with that. Look, as I said before, at the time when you are 18 to 21, you still grow into your body. Maybe he's got over the injury issues. If we are going to do the deal, I like the player. I like the profile. I don't like the 560 days that he's been out for. He's on 25k a week. United would probably look to do the deal. I like the player, but I don't want to do the deal because I just think that, look, this could be catastrophic. Look, you pay this money, and are we going to have another future Luke Shaw? Look, I don't mind people wanting to take a gamble on it, but for me, it's not something that that I would do. City can, because if Anderson doesn't do well, they can sell him for at least half of that amount of what United pay. Would sell him for 20, or he wouldn't even sell him. I don't know if we got the money or not. And look, Sam, look, again, look, on this channel, I'll always give you, as much fact as I possibly can. Feel free to fact check me, as well, by the way. Yes, I've just subbed. Look, guys, the fact you're willing to give the channel a sub and the fact that you are watching the channel, look, means so much to me as well. Nuno Mendes had these issues and we missed out on him. And look, I could be completely wrong, but look, I've got to give my opinion at the moment. Can we afford to take a risk? I'm not sure. So let's talk about, look, I want to shift focus a bit. Let's talk about what Michael Carrick has had to say after the post-match conference. Now, look, where I do agree with, and I do agree with you, Mendes, I do agree with you, is the best fullback in the world at the moment. One of my Michael Carrick, let's talk about what he said. Look, I do agree with some of the things that Michael Carrick said. Look, he said that this is the one game. He's saying that it's not going to derail the season. It's one game. And look, where I do agree with that comment is, we live in a hyperbole. I think some channels, and I'm not having a pop at other channels, look, they go to the extreme. This is one game. Look, I think sometimes we've got to get a grip. We do have to get a grip. This is a new season and we've got to get a grip. Look, we know, or I know, we're not going to win the Premier League. It could still happen, but that is my view and opinion. Look, Man City weren't great. Liverpool weren't great. Ipswich won. Hull City won. Spurs got hammered. It's going to be a ridiculously competitive season. Again, Aston Villa got absolutely pummeled. So where I do agree with a Michael Carrick, look, let's not get carried away just yet, because look, it is the one game we can grow into the season. And look, as Carrick says, he does say, look, they have got a plan for the season. Where I don't agree with Carrick, and this is where Michael Carrick concerns me, is he was talking about during the game that we played well, and the reason why we lost was only because they scored goals from a set piece. I'm sorry, Michael. Look, to say that, and again, I know he has to say it, but to come out and say that, I'm sorry. To me, it is embarrassing. How can Michael Carrick sit there after watching that display? He said that we did some good things. What did we do? We were slow in possession. We can't break a low block. Again, he gives some waffle excuse about breaking a low block, which I don't agree with at all. Look, I know Michael Carrick has to toe the party line, but it doesn't help to say that we played well and the only reason why Hull won was because of the 2 goals. I think that's highly disrespectful to Hull City, by the way. We were atrocious. We were slow in the pass. All we did was play outside. We did these passes. We had 72% possession. We did nothing with that possession. We were slow to move them out. We allowed them to get set. We weren't quick enough. His tactics were completely wrong. And to sit there and say, and also get annoyed. And the reason why Michael Carrick got annoyed is because they touched a nerve. Look, I want Carrick to succeed. Michael Carrick isn't my choice. I still believe that Michael Carrick is tactically inept. I don't think this passing around the box is Carrick style. We need to be counter-attack. I think we need to press from the front. I think he got it completely wrong. Dorgu left, Cunha. Look, we've got 3 players in that game that play deep. Bruno Fernandes, Tillemans, and Cunha. Where is the outlet? How do we break down a low block? And Michael Carrick has had weeks and weeks and weeks to plan this game. So look, I think some of his comments to me, I think, are naive. The fact that Hull City conceded 66 goals last season, sixth in the championship, and we can't break them down, and we didn't score. Look, newly promoted teams are a danger. I accept that, but there is no excuse for what happened. We can still lose, but it wasn't the loss for me. It can happen. It was the performance, and it's what we saw the whole of last season. And another thing that irked me about what Carrick said as well. He sat there and we were talking about it, and he was talking about how they've not lost a lot of games. Yeah, but Michael, we saw how you played. I saw how you played, and it wasn't good. So look, there is time. We've got to bounce back very, very, very quickly. I believe we can. I honestly believe that we can. I'm hoping that this is a blip, and I want to give Michael Carrick time. I want to see what he can do. He's got to be given the players, and I want to give him time. So look, I don't. Many of you, and I will get into the comments as well, you are going to be angry. I get that. Michael Carrick, I still have the reservations on him, but I want to give him time. Let every coach that comes into this club, I don't want them to be. There should not be an excuse. And what I want to happen is you give Carrick players, and if Michael Carrick is not good enough because of the tactics, then that's on him, and he can't blame the players. That is what I do want to see. So let me get into your chats and see what you are saying. I can't say I've watched Balde. I've no idea if he's good. Lots of people seem concerned regarding the fitness. Quick question, then we need a left back. Look, I think at the moment, I think I like Salinas. I like David Rahm, and also I like Amas. I think we've got a ready-made. He is young. He is young. Can we afford that? I think that we should keep Amas and bring Rahm into the side. I like Rahm. Look, his assists were fantastic last season. I think he was the most assisted fullback in the Bundesliga. 28. I think it's perfect. I think he's perfect. I really, really do. Then that one. Then that one, Lewis Hall is not going to happen as well. What's a bit concerning, all of the matches that he has lost have been to teams playing a back five exactly. Done that one. Anyone thinking we could challenge this season should be on some type of medication. That's why we need Ahmad exactly. Imagine if Lewis Hall made the error against Liverpool or United, also a meltdown. Exactly, the whole game was similar to the Brentford away game under Eric Ten Hag a few seasons ago. Absolutely no running and urgency. And Stephanie, look, I think for me that is my biggest concern. Look, teams lose. Everybody's going to lose this season. Okay, it is what is it about this team? And I think it is a mental block. If you look at the players in this team, we've got good players. We've got good players. I think it is an absolute mental block in this team that we need to get over it as well. But look, I agree with you. It's like Hull watched the AC Milan game, and yes, and look, we spoke about the AC Milan game. Look, this little channel, and what I have some look. You guys in the chat are intelligent. You watch football. You guys are fantastic. We spoke about the pre-match, and we said what Hull would do, and guess what? They did it. I bring it up because we have got experts, we've got data analysis, and we saw what was going to happen, and it happened. So, look, I agree with you. Give Carrick a chance and forget Saturday and move on. And Andrew, I agree with you. I agree with you. There's nothing with criticising the game, nothing with criticising the team. Nothing with criticising the manager, but we've got to move on. Look, we've got to move on, and I do agree with Andrew. We've got to give Carrick time. Look, I'm going to say this again. I don't think he's tactically good enough. I don't think he's got a plan B. Look, his plan B, Michael Carrick's plan B, was to put Maguire up front. That was his plan B. So let's hope that Michael Carrick can grow into the season. Let's get him a left back. Let's get him a striker, and he's got to be given time. He's got to be given time. It's like Carrick is making it up as he goes along. Hull were a physical team. We need to use technical superiority, but we couldn't. Tielemans, Bruno, Cunha just off it, not making the right decisions and slow 100%. JB, given what Carrick makes, how long or how many games will manager give him? He makes financial sense in your experience. What's the strategy? Look, the strategy with Michael Carrick is they want to coach. They've got ideas. They want to coach. Look, Michael Carrick, if you're going to look at it from a financial perspective, he makes sense. They've got to give Michael Carrick time. Look, Carrick isn't my guy. But I've got to be fair here, and he needs to be given time. The only way Carrick doesn't get time for me, look, if he goes on a losing run, he loses 10 games, then he's got to go. Look, there are circumstances where Michael Carrick does have to go. If he gets to a point whereby he's losing 10 games and we're like 13th, and the football is also bad, then I think at that point he has to go. But look, he's got to be given time. This fan base. Look, I know there's a project every single time, but it's so difficult. We expect so much as a fan base. And look, Carrick, he knows this. He absolutely understands what this club is. And I don't completely blame Michael Carrick, by the way. Look, Carrick can give instructions. Michael Carrick can't tell these players to do the simple things. They've got to do it as well. So look, I do agree. Look, I think we've got to give Carrick at least until Christmas time. And if he's lost God knows how many games, then I think at that point you've got to put your hands up and say it's not good enough. It's Michael Carrick. But if these players can't play for a Michael Carrick, I can't see them playing for anybody else. Says from Bruises, yes, again, I do agree with you. I think he is. Love Carrick as a player, but as a coach, it won't matter who you buy. Carrick and his coaching staff are championship level. They're not good enough. Again, I'll struggle to disagree with you on that one. I don't think it's possible to be that bad again. The only way is up. Carrick needs to up the physical. Rubin was better with that. The only thing he's done right is taking a risk by playing these guys to fitness prep. Used to do that, Pep did. Carrick going with the slow and steady holistic approach to fitness. Cunha, Tielemans should have come off for the bench to build the fitness. Look, we can't, and again, I completely agree with you. We can't do that. Look, if you want to win a league, and some of you think that we can, not necessarily on this channel, in this space, a lot of people think that we can. Look, we've got to win the next game. Look, we've got to get these players fit. Look, we are on the back of a World Cup as well. So look, I do think as the season progresses, we do get better. But Michael Carrick does 100% have to figure out this team. He's gonna have to figure it out. I think we need another striker, and I think we need a left back in this side. So look, a little bit on injuries as well before I go. I do want to talk about that as well. Ahmad is out for 6 weeks. I like Ahmad. This is a big season for him. I think this is a make or break. I like Ahmad. I really, really do. I think he's make or break for him this season. And again, I think he will choose his own path. I think he would have to sign a new contract or he will leave. Ahmad is one of those players that needs the game time. I want him to come back. I think he's one of the only players in our squad that can have an impact, but he's got to increase his numbers as well. Mason Mount is apparently back for the Ipswich game. This is a player who only had a knock, but apparently he is back for the Ipswich game. De Ligt as well. No, he is training in the first team, but he's not going to be back anytime soon. Look, with De Ligt and these sorts of players, look, this is a facade. He is nowhere near back. Look, I don't think we're going to see De Ligt back until November, October. I think he's going to be out for the full year, possibly longer than that. It's going to take him a little while to get back up to speed as well, by the way. So, look, I think he needs to be given time as well. So, look, we are getting better. I think, look, we do need a centre back as well. Last season when Carrick says picks a line, last season when Carrick was winning, no one was talking. But now this season, you're saying he's bad. Look, picks a line. If you've not watched this channel before, if you go back, I criticised Michael Carrick all season last season. One of the things, like, if you go back, and I'm not expecting you to, look, I'm not gonna have a pop. I think you're entitled to your view. What I said last season is Michael Carrick was winning games, not playing well. If you look at how Michael Carrick played, there were a couple of games that he played well, but Michael Carrick's system wasn't great. Look, as I've said there, look, I am not saying let's get rid of a Michael Carrick. Michael Carrick's system wasn't good last season, and I think we finished third. I think we blitzed third, but it wasn't good. Michael Carrick, his system wasn't good. We won. I don't care how we won, but if you go back and we watched every single game on this channel, it wasn't great. And I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to lie. The record books are not going to tell you how he played, but he wasn't great. So Michael Carrick, I will give him time, and it shows you. It shows you this channel is I'll give him time, and it's one game. So he's got to be given time, even though he is not my guy. Get Dorgu off my wing. So frustrating. Ahmad in product needs upping. Agree with you, Stephanie. Wait, Chris Wheeler saying that Ahmad, he might be back. Look, hopefully Ahmad is not going to be out for 6 weeks. I think that will be fantastic if he is back. Ahmad looks sharp in pre-season. I do agree. Why is Bruno always not awake until mid-September? He needs to show up against Ipswich, Lead, and look, Stephanie. Bruno Fernandes looked disinterested. I've always had big concerns about him, and the biggest concern for me in that game, look, he wasn't even moaning. He wasn't even remonstrating with his players. Look, he just looked like he couldn't be bothered. And I hate to say it, I'll criticize him for it, but I'd rather an animated Bruno Fernandes. Look, it wasn't a good game. Hopefully he can come back. But look, I wasn't impressed again. And he is a captain. I'll always say this, I'll die on this hill. He's not good enough. He's not good enough to be the captain, but however, he can't be the captain. It can't be taken off of him unless he leaves. We can't lose him this season because we're not going to replace him. So, look, Bruno Fernandes, he's got to step up this season. I'm sure he will. But again, when he's got no space, he's ineffective. So, look, we should see a better Fernandes, but as I said there, he looks so disinterested. But look, hopefully, look, it's one game. It's one game. Ipswich, we will go again. We will do another preview of the match as well. done that one. Done that one. Definitely looked disinterested as well. So look, guys, I am going to go on that note. Look, I know it is frustrating, but we've got to give this time again. Maybe Bruno isn't happy. Maybe he's not happy. And maybe could he leave it at the back end of the window? I hope not. So let's see. But look, guys, I will be back this evening with a show. Look, guys, thank you so much for watching as well. Look, I do appreciate the likes. Look, one thing I'll always say on this channel is, look, you guys, look, you make the channel happen. Without you guys, this channel does not happen. I appreciate the interactions. I appreciate the likes. It humbles me every single time. Look, I've been doing this now for a year. I never take this for granted. And look, this is something that I do love to do. So look, guys, I will see you tonight. Look, have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you to the new people on this channel. You are more than welcome. And look, guys, we never mind the comments. As long as it's respectful, we don't mind. So, look, guys, on that note, I am JB. This is the United Devil channel.